Welcome to Life 2 million years ago. In this series, we try to reconstruct what life was like at various points in the distant past. So grab your spear, put on your animal skins, and get ready to learn about what life was like 2 million years ago when our ancestors were just starting out as hunter-gatherers. It's hard to overstate just how much the world has changed over the last 2 million years. Our planet is home to all sorts of advanced technologies that we take for granted every day. We have computers, automobiles, iPhones, space travel, and more. But these innovations are recent in the grand scheme of things. And it's not even clear that the people who invented them could believe how different the world would be just a few decades later. Even the concept of a decade is fairly recent. Before 1900, most people couldn't imagine that anything could change in such a short period of time, and yet a lot has changed since then. So it's equally difficult to understand how different the world was just 2 million years ago. Back then, humanity was just getting started. Our ancestors were struggling to survive as nomadic hunter-gatherers. They spent their days searching for food and their nights huddled around a fire with other members of their small tribe. There were no cities, no farms, no technology, no nothing. It was a primitive world that was very different from the one we live in today. And yet it's also a world that we can still learn a lot from if we know where to look. By studying the archaeological record, we can get a glimpse of what life was like 2 million years ago and see how our ancestors survived in one of the harshest environments imaginable. 2 million years ago, the Earth's population was only about 5 million people, all living in small groups of 30 to 50 individuals. The largest group ever found was about 100 people. These groups were made up of adult males and females, their children and their elderly relatives. Each group consisted of several families that were related by blood or marriage, and they lived together in order to protect themselves from predators and the elements. This type of social structure is still found today among some isolated tribes in the Amazon rainforest and the jungles of New Guinea, but it was the norm for human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. For most of human history, men and women have had to rely on their wits and their physical prowess to survive. They were constantly on the move in search of food and shelter, and they had to be prepared for anything. In this respect, life 2 million years ago was a lot like life today for the roughly 1 billion people who live in extreme poverty and are constantly struggling to meet their basic needs. The people 2 million years ago didn't just wake up one morning and decide to go hunting and gathering. It was a necessity. There was no other way to get food. Hunting and gathering is a risky way of life. It requires a great deal of knowledge and skill, and there is always the possibility that you will not be successful. But it is also a very intimate way of living. People have to work closely together and rely on each other for their survival. This sense of community and cooperation is what allowed our ancestors to survive for so long. They had to be able to work together to hunt large animals and to gather food. They also had to be able to share their food and resources with each other and help each other out when times were tough. This kind of cooperation is still seen today among the Hadza, a tribe of hunter-gatherers who live in Tanzania. The Hadza are one of the few remaining groups of people who still live the traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and their way of life gives us a glimpse into what life was like for our ancestors 2 million years ago. The Hadza live in small groups, and they spend their days looking for food. They eat a variety of foods, including meat, berries, fruit, and tubers. They use bows and arrows to hunt animals, and they gather food using a variety of tools. The Hadza also have a strong sense of community, and they rely on each other for their survival. They share their food and resources, and they help each other out when times are tough. The Hadza way of life is a reminder that our ancestors did not simply wake up one morning and decide to become farmers and build cities. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture was a gradual process that took place over thousands of years. And the skills and knowledge that our ancestors developed as hunters and gatherers were essential for their later development. While the Hadza are an example of a modern-day group of people who live a traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle, they are the exception rather than the rule. For the vast majority of people today, hunting and gathering is not a way of life. It is a hobby. And yet, it is through this activity that many people get their closest glimpse of what life was like for our ancestors 2 million years ago. For many people, hunting and gathering is a way to connect with nature and with the land. It is a chance to get away from the hustle and bustle of modern life and to experience something more primitive and more authentic. When people go hunting, they often feel as though they are doing something that our ancestors did for hundreds of thousands of years. They feel as though they are tapping into something primal and instinctual. The same is true of gathering. When people go out into the forest and pick berries or dig up tubers, they feel as though they are doing something that our ancestors did every day. They feel as though they are part of the natural cycle of life. Of course, modern-day hunting and gathering is very different from what our ancestors did. We do not have to worry about being eaten by a predator or dying of starvation. But in many other respects, it is exactly the same. We still have to use our knowledge and our skills to find food. We still have to work cooperatively with others to be successful, and we still have to rely on the natural world to provide for our needs. In this way, hunting and gathering is a living tradition that connects us to our ancestors and to the natural world around us. It is a chance to experience life in a way that is both primitive and profound. Finally, let's take a look at how people lived 2 million years ago. What was their daily routine like? What did they do for fun? And how did they deal with the challenges they faced? People who lived 2 million years ago were nomads. They traveled from place to place in search of food and shelter. They lived in small groups of about 30 to 50 people, and they were constantly on the move. They didn't stay in one place for too long because they had to follow the food. When the food supply ran out, they packed up and moved on to a new location. This meant that they were constantly exposed to the elements, and they had to be prepared for anything. They needed to be able to build shelters to protect themselves from the rain, snow, or cold. They also needed to be able to defend themselves against predators and other dangers. The people who lived 2 million years ago were also constantly in search of food. They ate a variety of foods, including meat, berries, fruit, and tubers. They hunted animals using spears and other weapons, and they gathered food using baskets and other tools. This meant that they were constantly hungry, and they had to spend a lot of time looking for food. They also had to be careful not to waste any food, because there was never any guarantee that they would be able to find more. Despite all of these challenges, the people who lived 2 million years ago were able to survive and thrive. They were able to adapt to new environments, and they were able to develop new technologies to help them survive. They were also able to create complex social structures, and they were able to develop a rich culture. In conclusion, life 2 million years ago was a challenge, but it was also an adventure. It was a time when our ancestors were just starting to explore the world, and they had to be prepared for anything. They were constantly in search of food and shelter, and they had to be able to defend themselves against the elements and against predators. But despite all of these challenges, they were able to survive and thrive. They were able to adapt to new environments, and they were able to develop new technologies to help them survive. They were also able to create complex social structures, and they were able to develop a rich culture. So while life 2 million years ago was definitely not easy, it was an exciting time to be alive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.